And there are lots of things to get at, more things than we will be able to cover, as Janelle always knows. Janelle reminds me I will never get done with everything I want to talk about, right? Yeah. So what I think I'm going to do today is when we get to time to take a break, I'm going to take a break.
Oh, really?
There's your critics,
I'm going to take a break.
and the rest of you aren't.
And, then when I get done with what I want to get through, then we'll take time for either questions in small group and then all together or all together. So instead of trying to get all of it done before we take a break, I will just take a break in the middle there. So anyway, before we get going in this, I want to tell you that I have a very special day coming up on Tuesday.
It's your birthday.
Huh?
It's your birthday.
Yes, which one?
Oh,
71.
21.
61, 41, 70, 70. Well, my brother is 70, and he's my older brother.
He's your
And my birthday, according to my driver's license, is May 4th, 1946. So what birthday is coming up for me?
Oh, your brother's doing.
Huh?
Your 68th
No, my
birthday.
baptismal
Your
birthday.
68th birthday.
No, my 25,000th birthday.
Oh, that's good then.
I'm turning 25,000 next Tuesday.
Well done. You look good.
I broke Methuselah's record. Why do we count by the years? It's by the days. I will be 25,000 days old. It's my birthday anniversary. 25,000. So, and I'll be 600,000 hours old. And it goes on from there to minutes and seconds. That's my children's sermon on Sunday. I will work it in. Huh?
I'm glad we knew that.
Do you know something? I did not charge any extra for that information. So 25,000, yes. Dale sent me something a couple of years ago to figure out days and weeks and everything, and I remembered it was early October. I had to go back and check to see exactly how many, so it's on the 14th. So that is interesting, though, because it means that not many people live to be 40,000 days old. You know, there may be some, but not many. And very, very few people would live to be 1,000,000 hours old. You'd have to be in the 106, 107, 108, something like that. I forget. So anyway, our time is limited.
We're already late now.
Shame on you.
I'm the teacher. I get to do what I want. So anyway, microphone's on now? Okay. Exodus 1 to 18. I'm actually very much looking forward to next week as well, where we get to what I call the 10 words. A lot of people talk about it as the 10 commandments. But very much of what forms Judaism is in these chapters. Very much of the practice of Judaism is right here. And so the strange thing, if you were to look at Genesis from however far back it goes, we're probably at about 1900 and something before Christ for the time of Abraham. By the time Joseph is down in Egypt, it could be as much as 200 years after that. So in the 1750s, between Genesis 50 and Exodus 1, there is a period of roughly 400 years about which we know nothing. 400 years about which we know nothing, not a word. Exodus 1 to 2 covers about 80 years. Exodus 3 and following, all the way through Numbers 10, is a period of a little over 1 year. Numbers 11 to the end is about 38, 39 years. And Deuteronomy is a speech that one can give in one day, with a little bit of introduction and conclusions. So it's not like we have a balanced thing every calendar month. We have a little bit of the story. We have some highlights. We have some vignettes along the way. Much of what is formative for Judaism comes just in this very short period of time from Exodus 3, where you have all the plagues, and then they're going to leave, and just early into the time after they have wandered, Moses is going to go up on Mount Sinai, and that's going to be 40 days, and the information he gets there is really all wrapped up in Leviticus. And then as he comes down, then they have excuse me, some things that are done. They leave a month and a year after the Exodus, which is, since it takes them a couple of months to get to Mount Sinai, that'll be a little less than a year that they were there. And then because of the complaining and grumbling, it'll take them almost a generation for that generation to die out before they go into the land. And Deuteronomy is a speech to the people who were either too young when they left to be mature adults. All the mature adults, except for a couple, are going to die out. And then Deuteronomy, second giving of the law, is going to be pretty much a resetting of all of the instructions that were given to Moses in the first generation down by Mount Sinai. And then they will go in. There's a few things that come at the end of that. So, what we have in Genesis already is this discussion that a new Pharaoh rose up who did not know Egypt. So, anyway, for our Exodus, we're going to have Moses and what happens in Egypt, then the Passover and the events at the sea, Mount Sinai and the giving of the 10 words and all of that, then the building, or the instructions about the tabernacle, the golden calf being built, and then the tabernacle will get built. So, chapter 1, we're going to have the list of the names of the 12 tribes. Remember, Joseph is already down in Egypt, and his family is going to come down with him, including his wife and his kids. That's going to be a listing of 70 people altogether, a nice, interesting number. But Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, then Dan, Naphtali, and Gad, and Asher. So the total number of people born to Jacob is 70, and Joseph already in Egypt. Then it says that whole generation died, but the Israelites were prolific. They had a lot of children. Jacob had been told, and Abraham had been told, don't expect to come back here to the land of Canaan until you have a lot of descendants. Because they're going to take over the land. Right now you couldn't control the whole land anyway. And the people of Canaan have not filled out all of their wickedness yet. They've not done all the wicked things that they're going to do. And so we'll just wait on that. And so God says, I'll bring you back later. And in the archaeological time period, that would be the late Bronze Age. And it's the land of, or the era of the mighty Canaanite cities, which takes place during the time while Israel is down in Egypt. During all the time that they are simply down in Egypt and growing and multiplying, things are going fine until they become so numerous that they're more numerous than the Egyptians. And so they're prolific. God has given them many children. It's what the Israelis will sometimes talk about, that if the Palestinians were all in the state of Israel, instead of having its own separate state, they would be more numerous and take over the land. And so it's of convenience to have those borders, even though there's a lot of troubles with that. Now it says a new Pharaoh arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, or a new king arose. What I mentioned very briefly last time, in the Egyptian history, you have the early period, the early kingdom, the middle kingdom, and the new kingdom. And between that, you have intermediate period 1 and 2. The time of Joseph is intermediate period 2. And it's the time that they know as the time of the Hyksos, Hyksos. The Hyksos were people from eastern Turkey who had learned how to train horses for chariots. Instead of just draft animals that would pull weaponry that they would be able to use. Now you could actually have chariots who would go into battle. Sometimes the chariots are depicted with 2 men, sometimes with 3 men. So you either have a driver and someone who holds up a shield and a warrior, or a driver, and the warrior who holds up a shield. And you'll see different places where all those are referred to, and there's some questions about a lot of things because of that. But anyway, so the first thing is that in the New Kingdom period, the native Egyptians figured out how to train horses for chariots. And they had gone south into Upper Egypt, that's higher in elevation to the south, and the water of the Nile flows toward the Mediterranean. Well, they came back, and they took the land back. And so that's the new ones who rise up. Thutmose is in there, Ramses, which with an R-M-S, and Re is the god of the Egyptians, and so M-S-S-M-Cs, and Thutmose. And Moses' name is a real good Egyptian name. Comes right out of that same kind of venue as the others. So, they decide we are going to oppress these Israelites so they don't become so numerous and rise up against us. I once looked at a Bible dictionary that I would not have paid 1 penny for after I looked at it. It was a newly produced one. I won't even tell you what company produced it. But I looked it up. I looked up in there and I found a picture of the Israelites building the pyramids. They were about half done. So they were enslaved to build the pyramids. The pyramids were probably built about 700 years before Abraham. Old Kingdom, about 2,500 before Christ. And so that would be off by only roughly 1,200 years. The person who did the illustrating had no concept of history, just knew how to draw pictures and figured out what she wanted to draw. Happened to be a woman who was the illustrator for that. If they were that bad, why would I pay any money for that book? Okay, I don't care what knowledge they have in there, if they're that much off. So they're building store cities. What they're actually building is Minneapolis. Why? Grain elevators.
Yeah.
Okay, the people who led Egypt, they were good if they were able to control southern Egypt and northern Egypt, upper Egypt and lower Egypt, and coordinate the raising of grain by the coordination of the irrigation systems. Long as they could keep everybody working together and doing the irrigation, and maybe you go 15 miles wide each way from the Nile to be able to raise the grain, and then they would have shallow craft that are going to bring that grain north, and Pithom and Ramses are kind of up by the Nile Delta, where then you can have a deeper draft for a ship, and they would be sending that grain out through the Mediterranean. We ought not think that everybody was just on their own land way back then. From the late Bronze Age, toward the end of this time period, there was a wreck found off the coast of Greece, I think off the coast of Cyprus actually, with goods from 7 different ports of call in the Mediterranean on it. So they were hugging the shore a little bit, but they were doing trade, and so they bring what they've got. The Greeks, they had a lot of olives, but they didn't have a lot of flat land for raising grain. And so others, there were ingots on that, and from metalwork that they had done. So anyway, the king of Egypt, they say, well, we're going to try to make trouble. And so they said to the 2 midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, that if it was a baby boy, they should kill the baby boy. Now that doesn't mean, I don't think, that they were expecting that they were going to take a knife and slice the child's throat. It means when that baby's being born, wrap the cord around the neck. Then when the baby dies, oh, I'm sorry, the baby died. You know, the cord was wrapped around its neck, but they're not going to do it on purpose. My professor, Willie Hasselt, said, now they were not the only midwives, they were just the heads of the labor union. Free as well, Mr. Hamlin over there. That's all I learned in college. I got to share everything I know. So, finally they said, just forget the game, throw all the boys in the river. So, did Moses get thrown in the river?
With a basket?
Yeah, a basket, but, yeah, he did. So,
I'm missing the reason for that.
if you kill the boys, they can't grow up to become soldiers.
Well, they won't.
Okay?
They wouldn't procreate.
And they aren't going to reproduce either. They very often you'll see in texts of war texts where women who are pregnant get stabbed in the belly. The child gets killed as well. We got to stop the next generation from coming along. And so it was their desire. It was the way they figured to do it. We got to stop the reproduction. We got to stop them from having children. In some ways, you would think it would be more wise to kill the women, because the women are going to reproduce the children. You know, one guy could have 10 children by 10 different women, but this is, you know, they're going to grow up to be soldiers, and so that's unfortunately a common thing throughout the world.
And this is for the Hebrew?
The Egyptians want to kill the Hebrews, yeah. See, they weren't always slaves. Why did Israel end up in Egypt? What did they do wrong that God punished them and sent them to Egypt?
It was a famine, wasn't it?
What did they do wrong so that God sent them to Egypt?
They sold Joseph into slavery?
What did they do wrong that God sent them to Egypt?
What did they do wrong?
Nothing. Nothing. They did wrong, but Joseph says, well, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good to save much people alive. So in other words, they didn't end up in Egypt because they had sinned against God. They sinned against God, and God still let them live and go down to Egypt. He could have just left Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh there and let the others all die back in the land of Canaan. So the point I want to make is when we're going to look at their deliverance and God delivering them and redeeming them, it's not that they are being redeemed from their sins. They didn't do anything wrong to become slaves in Egypt. They weren't sold by God into slavery. They were delivered so that God says, I'll show you how I can take my people and put them in a foreign land and protect them and save much people alive. So God's gracious in spite of what they did. And that's what Joseph says. You meant it to evil, God meant it to good. I didn't particularly like the jail boys, but God meant it to good to save many people alive. So now we find out that a Levite man and his wife have a boy, that we'll find out about other family members, and they put their child into a little basket. The only other time this word is used in the Bible is for the flood. Okay, this is the same word as is used for Noah's Ark, along with the pitch that's put on the outside, the tar that's put on the outside so it doesn't sink. And so it says Pharaoh's daughter found this little basket in by the bulrushes, and the baby is crying, and we're all laughing because we know that Miriam, we assume, is standing there, and Mom and Dad said, we'll see if we can get our son, who looks really good. He's a real handsome little baby. They all are, aren't they? Well, not all of them, but
They are.
ours are all beautiful or handsome. But anyway, she then, Miriam says, I can find a woman to nurse her. So she gets paid for nursing her own child, Mom does. And then when he is grown up, then Pharaoh's daughter brings him into the palace. We can only assume that he is learning about administration and things like that. I mean, everybody says that's what's going on. It doesn't say all that, but she's raising this child as if he is her own, but he knows that he's a Hebrew. Remember, it's Hebrew at this point, not Israelite or Jew or Israeli or anything like that. These are now, at this point, still the Hebrew peoples. And when he grows up, then he sees a taskmaster beating up on one of his fellow Hebrews. Looks this way and that, sees nothing going on, and Mr. Ten Commandments is a murderer. Isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, maybe. Is this an act of war? Is every soldier a murderer? He's a murderer. Well, maybe not. Maybe he is acting as a warrior against those who are oppressing his people. We might talk about that as guerrilla warfare or something like that. So, don't quite push it that, oh, he is a murderer. He caused someone's death, but it was because he saw that person attacking someone. And so, this, some people would say, justifiable homicide. And people can go free for that. Not everybody who has caused somebody's death is in prison for it. Sometimes they say, well, we understand why this goes on. But there's this phrase when he tries to get two Hebrews who are fighting, who made you ruler and judge over us? So when he's 40 years old and in the prime of his strength, he has to flee for his life. When he's going to come back, it's going to be at age 80. Now, I'm going to mention one little thing that's just kind of on the side here. People say, well, I prayed to God and he didn't answer my prayer. I'd like you to remember this story every time you say that or hear that. How old was Moses when the people cried out in their bondage? How old was Moses when the people cried out in their bondage? He wasn't born yet. Okay? Chapter 1. So he cries out, they cry out in their bondage, and somehow soon after that, Moses is born. All right, and he's how old now? 40. He flees, and when he comes back, how old is he when he's going to lead them up? 80, and his brother's 83. 80-year-olds are not usually the ones who go first into battle. So if there's going to be a victory, God is going to give the victory instead of Moses with his might winning it. So God says, I'm going to wait until everybody nobody would expect anything from this guy, and then I will win a victory. How many people end up dying from among the Israelites at the sea? How many of the Israelites got killed in that battle?
None.
None, because there was no battle. There was no battle. They go through, the waters come back when Moses puts his arm out, and God lets the waters go back. There's no battle. God says, well, I'll win the victory. Might think about that on Good Friday. God wins the victory. And people say, yeah, but we've got to do something, right? No. You could live your life after the victory, but to win the victory, we didn't do anything about that. In fact, we were on the other side. So, anyway, Moses then flees. He goes to Midian, which is roughly somewhere in here, in the eastern part of the Negev, of the southern area. So, southwest of the Dead Sea is where he's going to show up. And a lot of people are going to later talk about him as going down very far into the southern point of the Sinai. That's questionable by lots of people about whether that's where it would have all taken place. More people think that it's taken place kind of south here of the Dead Sea, south of where the land of Israel is later going to be. What does the servant of Abraham do when he goes to look for Rebekah? He goes to a well. Where does Jacob go when he's going to find the family? To a well. Where does Moses go? To a well. Because that's the gathering place. Today we would say, buy a dog. You want to meet people in the neighborhood, buy a dog. You'll meet the other people in the neighborhood walking their dog. More people in our neighborhood know people who have dogs than anything else. Or rent a child, that's the other one. They like looking at baby carriages usually. Other than that, you can walk and nobody cares about you at all. I've had that happen. I walked my granddaughter the other day. People talk to you. They smile at you. Otherwise, they walk right by and put their head down. So rent a child and you're able to do the deed. Well, anyway, he marries Zipporah. The father-in-law's name is Reuel, or Jethro, or Hobab. All those names are listed at various points, and it's a puzzle to untangle. But it says he lives by his father-in-law, and what does he become but a shepherd? Okay. Now, most shepherds that I know are 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. He's 80 years old and he still hasn't grown up. I haven't grown out of that job yet. That's his job, to take care of the family, flocks. The interesting thing that I believe is going on here, I can't prove it, is that I think Reuel is worshiping Yahweh as well. I think so was Melchizedek. At least what we would know as the true God. And so God brings him there, watches over him, and he begins his family at this point. Gershom is his first child, and so then it says that God remembers the covenant. And here I'm going to already dab a little way into something that I hear talked about in very different ways. When there are a lot of people who say that, and I think they're correct in this one, that the covenant that God makes with Noah, when he says, I will never cause rain to fall, or I'll never cause a flood on the ground, again, to cover the whole earth. All right, and he says, and I'll put the rainbow up there, and every time I see a rainbow, I'll remember I'm not going to flood the whole earth. That's a covenant that God simply binds himself to and says, that's the way it is. Nothing that you do is going to stop it or start it. But a lot of people then say the covenant with Abraham was a covenant where God said, here's what I'm going to do for you, and it's kind of one-sided, whereas the covenant with Israel here, with what we're going to look at in chapter 20, with the 10 words, or as we mostly call them, the 10 commandments, then people say, then there were human obligations that were involved as well. And I want to pick that one apart very carefully for us. But the promises here, it says God remembered the covenant. He talks about, I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I don't think there are two different covenants. Because Genesis 12:4 said, and Abram went. He had to respond to that one too. So God expected Abram at first, to leave his country and his father's house and go to the land that God would show him. He had to do something. And then he had to see if he could get his wife pregnant. And finally, she gets pregnant. And then Isaac comes, and then Jacob and Esau come, and then Jacob's sons all end up down in Egypt. And now God says, I remember the promise I made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give them that land. So the land is the big promise. I'll give you a place to live. It's sort of like a temporary Garden of Eden. I will protect you there. I'll give you all that you need. I'll protect you from your enemies all round about. So now, when they are threatened in Egypt with their livelihood, then God says he's going to get them out. Now, they cried out in their bondage. 120 years plus later, their descendants will finally get into the land. So if you say, well, I prayed to God for a whole week, and nothing happened. Well, that's, God's days are not like our days. His years are not like our years. Right? And so we might think we've told him clearly enough, and that the big deal is, if it hasn't happened, we better explain it to him, get a little bit more about how serious we are about this, and that we're not just, don't care about the answer. And so we might think we have to keep telling God over and over and over again. Now, a lot of people say, well, God heard you and he just said no, or not yet, or something like that. Prayer is much more pouring ourselves before him and saying, we are tired of being God. We can't be God. We turn this over to you, and we ask you to give us strength for whatever goes ahead. But we kind of get the idea of prayer is telling God what he better fix. As if God is the guy who's standing at the clipboard at the Chevy dealer, and I want this changed, and I want this done, and it better be done when I come back home. He is not in that capacity. He happens to be the Almighty God. And I think to prowl our way in and trying to get some sense about everything that's going on, that we're probably stretching a little bit farther than we need to, and than we ought to. But God doesn't say, well, I'll do everything for you that you want me to. He says, I will be your God, and I'll keep my promises to you that I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Here, God is saying, oh, it took a long time, but I'm not leaving you, I'm not forsaking you. And in the bondage, then, he takes care of it through Moses. Yeah, it's going to be 120 years. So we may not get our own little desires. But then, after Moses has served his father-in-law, he sees this bush burning. And we get yo-yos like Eric von Daniken, who said that this was an incandescent light bulb that people from outer space flew in, and that they had just never seen one of those before. And yes?
Backing up just for a second, when you were talking about the covenant, and God remembers the covenant, and it sounded like what you were saying, and you didn't continue on that, was that we do have we respond to his covenant, his promise.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have to have, we need to have a response.
I wouldn't put it in need to have a response. We will live within it and recognize that we are part of his people.
You're going to have to elaborate.
Okay? It doesn't mean if you want to stay in the covenant, you have to go to church every Sunday.
Right. But
Okay.
if there is a promise, he's asking us to respond to it.
Not respond to it, but live within the framework of it. Okay? If I put a diamond ring on my wife-to-be's finger, she will respond by saying, yes, I'll marry you. But then from then on, it's not continued responses, but simply continued planning for our life together, and then living that out. So it's not like I have to keep on going a little farther and doing a little bit more and proving or showing to him that I'm still there, and that if I don't show I'm still there, then he's off the hook. Now I can leave the relationship,
Yeah.
but living within it doesn't necessarily have a whole bunch of obligations and restrictions. And next week we're going to hit that, and we're going to talk about it all the way through
Okay.
for the rest of the game.
Okay.
It's going to be a challenge to be able to get all that across.
Yeah.
But the need to, the supposed to, the should, the ought to, the have to, God expects us to, there is a sense in which with every one of those we put ourselves in the center.
Yes.
All right? And
Yeah.
then if something doesn't happen the way we want it to,
It's God's fault.
it's God's fault because we did our part. And so we want to stay away from that one. So Israel did nothing wrong, even when they were waiting for 120 years. They cried out in their bondage. We have no knowledge about what their faith was for 400 years. It's a complete zero, complete nothing. It would be nice if there was a little bit more there, but there isn't. And so until we see that there was something they had to do, and I don't see anything that they had to do when they were down in Egypt except live there, then we should not put in the strictures, well, they should have been doing this, or they had to do this, or that God didn't act on the covenant promise until they said, God, we need help. Remembering is not a sense of, oh, I forgot that.
Right, exactly.
It's,
Yeah.
he says, now that which is ready to bloom, now's the time when my promise to bring them back to the land is going to bloom, and I'm going to deliver them from those people. But they have to do really nothing. In fact, they're grumpy against him, with all of this stuff. So
then 400 years that aren't documented, could that just be the years of multiplication when they were getting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's when Egypt starts saying they multiplied so much that they're getting to be a threat to us now. We better oppress them. Then God says, you're not going to oppress my people. Let my people go.
So that's when this happens, right?
Yeah.
At this
At the end of it.
Right. So
Yep. It's when God says, hey, you're hurting my people. I'm going to send the cops and get you off. Except the cops happen to be water and plagues and things like that. Right?
Yeah.
So, Moses says, well, whom shall I say sent me? Oh, I am. Now that's called an intransitive verb. A transitive verb is where there's transit or movement. I go, I walk, I swim, I fish, I hunt. Well, hunting may be intransitive. People may just sit there forever waiting to shoot the gun. With the other ones, there's movement. But I am, would you like to draw a picture of that one? Ehya, Asher Ehya. I am who I am. Now, God says I'm here, and people can do, I cause to be what I cause to be, and they can try and look at all sorts of things, because the Hebrew words are, they can have a couple of different accents. But in essence, what God is saying is, I am. Now you can add, I am here for you, I am your God. That's where the word Yahweh comes from. I can't get into the deal much, but by the time of Jesus, the people said, we are not to use the name of Yahweh our God in vain. So if you are not to use the name of Yahweh your God in vain, what's the best thing to do? Don't use it. So, gosh darn, golly, oh my heavens, and you can keep on going all sorts of ways in which people simply would never use God's name, but get close. Never did figure out the Judas Priest.
It's a rock group.
Yeah. Well, this was long before the rock group. But the idea here is that people are going to say, well, we just won't use it. So by the time of Jesus, instead of saying Yahweh, they were saying a word that was a different word, Adonai, which is Sir or Lord or something like that. And so when the Masoretes, the Jews who put little dots in and above and around the letters to help people pronounce the words, when they came to Yahweh, they put the vowel points for Adonai in there. And then people later came along who didn't understand that stuff at all. And how did they read Yahweh with Adonai? Yehovah. Jehovah doesn't exist, except on Snelling and Thomas, right? And if you look up in the ceiling, you'll see JHYH or JHWH, however it is, this way, as well as all the letters spelled out this way. Because they acknowledge, and so when the people say Jehovah is the only name by which he was known, well, when I pastored at Jehovah for 4 years, I said, we are the Jehovah Witnesses. We are. Jehovah, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, there's some other crowd that borrowed that name and thought that they could do better with it. So the word Jehovah, even though it's going to be in translations, isn't really a proper Hebrew word in any sense. Okay? It's the consonants from the word Yahweh with the vowels from another word that and when I read this, I read Adonai when I read that out loud. I don't read Yahweh, I read Adonai. And so that was the tradition, and that's the way that goes. But anyway, God says, tell them I am has appeared to you and is telling you to do this. Now, El Shaddai comes earlier, El Elyon comes earlier. Yahweh is mentioned earlier, but he says, now this is the one, the name by which you are to know me. And then we have the promise of what's going to happen with the land. And so this is what is the red thread all the way through, that land. The New Testament says the church is worldwide, where it says go out into all the world and preach the gospel. So the whole earth becomes the place where God seeks to bring that restoration until he comes to return and do it completely. And then they are told, Moses is told that the land of Egypt is going to be despoiled. That's a war word. So a lot of people, they don't like this at all. Let's remember, and again, I am going to try to be fair to explain why God is doing what he is doing. Okay? There are a lot of people who are going to stand back and say, how can you believe in a God who kills people and just takes land away from them? The underlying thread of all of this, the undercurrent, is that God says, I am not going to let people be on this land forever if they are wicked over against other people. If there is child abuse, it's going to be stopped. Of course, we don't have that problem anymore. Not anymore. Sure we do.
Where do you live?
He's gonna plead not guilty today.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, and we're still struggling with those kinds of things, but God would say there's a point at which we draw the line. We say, no more of this. And so he says that the land is going to be despoiled. So now we get into all the different signs. And so we've got the snake that turns into or the staff into a serpent, the hand to be leprous, the blood that comes out from the water. And he says, show them these things. Let them know something kind of extra special is going on. Moses is so excited to be God's leader, he can't wait. He says, I'll do this for nothing. Any other prophets who are like that? And then, Jeremiah. Yeah, versus Isaiah, and particularly Isaiah and Ezekiel. Isaiah says, here am I, send me. Like the little kindergartner who wants to be chosen. And then God tells him what the job is. And he should have said, I don't think I like that job. To tell people that they're going to lose the land, but that's the way that goes. So anyway, finally God says, you will be God. You will be the guy who talks the words. You get them from me. You say them to Aaron, and Aaron will then publicly say them. So we got a variety of different times. Moses is to talk to Pharaoh. Aaron is to talk to Pharaoh. They're in Pharaoh's presence. They're out of Pharaoh's presence. Some of these plagues, we hear how they go away. A couple of them, we don't even hear how they go away. Some of them are really expanded. Some of them are quite small in terms of the amount of time that's given. But it says that God will harden Pharaoh's heart. We're going to see this a bunch. Let's play with this one right now. What does that mean?
He's going to not listen.
He's going to not listen. What is God doing in the process when he hardens Pharaoh's heart?
To show his own power.
To show his own power. Okay. Was Pharaoh a good guy and God makes him bad?
I don't know.
Bad guy.
Huh?
He was a bad guy.
He was a bad guy. He's a bad guy. He says, throw those baby boys in the Nile. Right? So, I have to tell you the Hans and Peter story. To get at this a little bit. May help. When our son Matt was in school, these are real people. Okay? And so they can someday tune in and watch this, and I hope I don't get in trouble for it. But Hans and Peter are real kids. They were on the bus with Matt. And one evening, my elder Clarence Schrader comes laughing as he comes into the elders meeting. He says, oh, Hans and Peter were fighting on the bus again. He says, they were going at it so bad in the back of the bus, I had to stop the bus and go back there, and I grabbed them each by the collar and I said, say you're sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Now, that made peace, right? Well, we know it made peace because they got off at the same bus stop. They lived kind of cattywampus from each other. What did Clarence see in the rearview mirror? They're duking it out. What did Clarence do? He hardened their hearts into the position they were in. And so Pharaoh never wanted to be loving. God says, when I say I'm God here, and Pharaoh says I'm God here, sooner or later, God's going to win over Pharaoh, who thinks he's God on earth. And so as these plagues come along, God is really being, I know this, people are going to shoot me probably for saying this, God is being very gracious with Pharaoh in Egypt. Could have just wiped the whole bunch of them out right away. All dead, and let the let the Hebrews have that land or any land they wanted to. Instead, he says, I will send plagues against them. Why? Because I want my people to go and sacrifice 3 days' journey out in the wilderness. Now that's the part that, come on. They go 3 days out, when are they coming back?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not coming back. They're going those 3 days out, and they're never coming back. And so why would the Pharaoh, who says, I'm afraid these people will rise up against us, why wouldn't he say, good riddance to you? Because he wants his bricks. Okay? These people are doing the dirty work for him. he doesn't want to let them go because he can pile the work on them and they can't say no. So the Egyptian people can sit back and smoke their pipes and watch the fish jump in the Nile and let these people do the work. So they're building these store cities, Pithom and Ramses, and so they're building grain elevators. And if you can get them to do the work, why should you bother doing the work? And so this thing with Moses who almost dies and his son gets circumcised, very puzzling passage. Nobody quite really knows what's going on, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But then Moses and Aaron speak to Israel, and then they ask leave. Can our people go and worship? And the taskmasters say, if you have enough time to think about doing something else, we're going to make you now find your own straw. But we still want just as many bricks, and they better stay together. So the straw just as the reinforcing agent within the clay, and they want even more of that. And so finally, what happens is Moses complains to God. He says, see, I told you they didn't even want to get delivered. They're struggling, but now we came, and now things are worse, God. There's one really sad passage in Jeremiah, in the chapter, I think it's about 43, it might be 44, so, where the people of Jerusalem say, Jeremiah told us that we were sinning against God, and we shouldn't be worshiping the Queen of Heaven and the other gods, so we turned back to just worshiping Yahweh. It's now worse than it was before. We're going back to worshiping the other gods. We tried this one, didn't work. And we all know of people who decided they're going to go to church, they're going to go back to church, and not long after that they're gone. They said, well, that didn't work. And so here, Moses complains to God, and God says, you just watch, you just wait, everything will be all right. And so the word Yahweh gets mentioned once again here, says once again that God remembers the covenant. That just means brings it up into now is the next point that there's going to be. And it says God will redeem with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. I want you to think about the fact that when we talk about redemption, we usually talk about it as we who are sinners are redeemed by God from our own sins and from the Lord's judgment upon them. This was simply redeemed, pulled out of the bondage situation that somebody else had caused. So we don't find anything in here about the sin of the Israelites, which either got them down there or was keeping God from redeeming them. He simply says, you don't have enough power to get out of there. I have power to bring you out, and you're not even going to have to fight. You simply follow instructions and you go in the direction that you're going to go. So God, yeah.
That word redeem always, I can't grasp quite what that means. Now, when you used to get S&H green stamps, and you went to a redemption center, is that the same meaning, or?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, but
But
you got something off of a shelf that
Yeah,
you
but
didn't have before,
in
and I
thi-
always
in
think
this
that God
sense-
took us off of the shelf.
in this sense, redemption would be more the woman who is being raped and the cop comes and arrests the rapist and frees her from the bondage that she is in that she did not cause. Or the child who's being abused and somebody comes and removes the parent so that the child is now free to grow without being hurt or harmed. So, buy out from oppression. Right, so the redeeming of the green stamps, not quite the same thing. And I know the redemption centers, we used to go to those too, but that's a little different sense of the word redeem. This would be much more, you are in trouble, you can't get yourselves out of it, I'll get you out of it. And yet God didn't send them down there to give them trouble. He sent them down there because the land of Goshen would have grain when it was bad back up in Canaan, and then finally he says, wait till you have a whole bunch of people, so the 70 becomes 600,000 men plus women and children when they're going to go out. So I think it's much more, you are being oppressed in a way that you can't escape, I'll take care of it for you. And I'll get you back out. So the old break somebody out of jail kind of a thing. You know, when they shouldn't have been put in jail. Some should be, some, not. Okay?
I did a word study on that. I think the Hebrews, some of the people I read about was that there was a cost involved in redemption. And to redeem is to buy back,
Yeah,
or
there,
possess again, or buy again.
at sometimes there is a redemption price. So if there was a person who was an indentured slave, they could be made free from their slavery.
Yeah.
But I'll jump at this early. Okay, I'll jump at this early from when I really wanted to do it. But what did it cost God to redeem Israel from Egypt?
Nothing.
Well, we could say it cost him the death of many of his foreign, of the unbelievers who were also his people. Okay, I have a question. I had a question in the assignment sheet for my Gen Ed religion course of compare the events at the sea with Easter. Are they the same? And I would say no. Because on Good Friday, God took the sin right inside himself and tore himself apart so that the Father punishes the Son. And I think that's a much deeper level than what we have here. You know, that he hurt himself, and that it's just, there's no easy way to understand atonement or salvation. But he did, in the early church, they used to, for the first couple hundred years, they talked about how Jesus redeemed us from the devil, and that he paid the ransom to Satan. Then they began to say, wait a minute, that's not quite right, because Satan's not that full-blown other god, that power of evil that has to be paid off. And so then they began to come up with some of the other terms of restoration.